Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our August WAMinar, Dyslexia in the Workplace, with Dyslexia Association of Ireland. My name is Niamh Brennan, and I'm a WAM Project Officer here at AHEAD. Thank you all so much for joining us today. So just before we kick off, I just want to let you know the captioning is available. So if you do want to watch it with subtitles, just click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We have my colleague Lauren, who's on tech today, so she'll be answering some of your questions in the chat box and the Q&A feature as well. If you do have any specific questions for our speakers, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the two presentations. So if you want to ask any of your questions in the Q&A box, it just helps us keep track of them. Also, if you would prefer to speak your answer or speak your question, apologies, you can click the raise hand function. It's at the bottom of your screen. And what we'll do is I'll unmute you and you can ask your question then. Please do use the chat box. You can chat to other attendees and you can just let us know where you're watching from today, or also share any links that you'd like to share. Do make sure though in the chat box, there's two options. There's one that you can just talk to panelists or panelists and attendees. So if you would like everyone to be able to see your comment, make sure that you press panelists and attendees. And also if you're on Twitter at all, please use the hashtag WAMinar. So it's WAMINAR. So just this morning, we're going to just launch a poll just to kind of see who's here and what kind of sector and background that you're from. Great, so I've just launched the poll there. And the first question is, please select the option most appropriate to you. So it's I work in HR, I am a designated disability access officer, I'm a hiring manager, I'm a line manager, or I'm a regular employee. And there's a second part of the question there, and it's what sector do you work in? And the options are public employer, private employer, higher education, further education, and then NGO, not-for-profit, and then there's an other option as well. So just while you're doing that, for those of you who are engaging for us for the first time, AHEAD works to create inclusive environments in education and employment. AHEAD has been around since 1988, and the WAM Programme, or WAM for short, is a project of AHEAD that has been around for 16 years now, since 2005. So the WAM Programme is funded by the Department of Social Protection. I'm going to end the poll there. I see there's a few more kind of coming in. It's great to see. It's always nice for us, and I know it's nice for our speakers as well, just to kind of see who our audience is and what kind of sector and background that you come from. End the poll, and I can share the results there. Great. So yeah, so we have 23% of people work in HR. We have 18% is a designated disability or access officer, line managers, employees. And yeah, it's great to see that even the sector wise then, so public employer is coming up top there, but we have a good few from private employer and from the education, also from the not-for-profit sector as well. Thanks so much for engaging in that. So just to kind of begin then, so we webinar today, we're going to have a short presentation kind of around WAM, around statistics around WAM from our employment manager, Caroline McGrotty. And then I'm going to invite on our speaker, Caoimhe O'Malley from Dyslexia Association of Ireland. The aim of this session is to raise awareness of dyslexia and to help attendees develop a deeper understanding while providing practical tips to assist the creation of dyslexia-friendly workplace. I'm going to invite Caroline to turn on her camera and mic now. Hi, Caroline. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good. Up in Donegal. So not in my usual setup for those of you who are familiar, although you can never tell really because it's just a white wall with the AHEAD poster in the background. So yeah, good to be here.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to do is I'm going to share the slides for you, and I'll let you go ahead with your presentation.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Niamh. So good morning, everyone, or it's nearly kind of good afternoon at this point. So my name is Caroline McGrotty, and I'm the employment manager with AHEAD. So before we have our keynote speaker, Caoimhe, I suppose I just wanted to give you a bit of background in terms of the landscape in higher education, in terms of the numbers of students with dyslexia, but also kind of to give you an overview of the WAM programme and how we support people with dyslexia in the workplace as well. So I have AHEAD's vision up there. So our vision is shaping an inclusive future where students and learners with disabilities can succeed. And our aim is to create inclusive environments in education and employment for people with disabilities. So I know many of you are already very familiar with AHEAD, and I see lots of familiar names, which is great. We have about 115 people watching the webinar today. But I think we had 220 registered. So a lot of you will be familiar with the work of AHEAD, but just wanted to kind of put that out there. So Niamh, next slide, please. Perfect. So I suppose this slide is showing a graph in terms of the numbers of students with disabilities in higher education. So we actually just released this new report, which looks at the academic term from 2019-2020. So that was released last month. So there's slightly updated figures from previous webinars that I probably would have presented on these numbers. So in the graph there, the blue line is the total students with disabilities across both undergraduate and postgraduate courses. So you can see that we started collecting the statistics way back in 1993, but I suppose we've been collecting them on an annual basis since 2008. And you can see that the numbers of students with disabilities has just risen. You know, I mean, it's gone from, I think, the laptop's quite far away, so I have the notes here. So it's gone from about 5,000 students in 2008 to almost 16,000 students in the academic term 2019-2020. So that's a really dramatic increase in the numbers of students going to higher education, which is really positive. It's great to see. So I suppose the full report is on our website, which has a lot more detail, but I'm kind of just going to talk about, I suppose, the breakdown. So Niamh, if you could move on to the next slide, that would be great. So in the academic term 2019-2020, this was the breakdown in terms of the profile of students with disabilities in higher education. So the largest cohort of students with disabilities is actually students with specific learning difficulties. So that would include dyslexia. So dyslexia has been, I suppose, the highest represented disability cohort in higher education over the last 10 years. We have seen increase in people with mental health, autism going to higher education, which is brilliant. But dyslexia currently represents, specific learning difficulty currently represents almost 37% of the total students with disability population. So next slide. So I actually went further detail in terms of breaking down the numbers of students with specific learning difficulties in higher education and what were the trends like for that particular cohort. So again, it's always been increasing. So in the academic term 2008-2009, we had 2,882 students registered with a specific learning difficulty in higher education. And at the time, I suppose specific learning difficulty represented almost 60% of the total students with disabilities population. So it was a very big cohort in terms of, I suppose, the disability profile. If we go back to the recent report that we published there, which is 2019-2020, students with specific learning difficulties represent almost 37% right now. So even though the percentage has dropped, it doesn't mean that the numbers have dropped. The numbers have increased. So it's almost 6,000. So it's actually like tripled in terms of individuals, but it has decreased in terms of, I suppose, the percentage. And that is because, I suppose, there are more disabilities being, I suppose, identified earlier on in childhood, that they're given that support in secondary education to enable them to go to third level and even actually right back to primary education. So we're seeing a lot more diverse range of disabilities now going to higher education, whereas 10 years ago, it may have not been common for particular groups of disabilities to go to higher education because they just weren't given the support at primary or secondary level. So even though the percentage has decreased, it's not bad news. The actual individual numbers has increased, tripled. So that's just kind of give you a bit of background on that there. So next slide, please, Niamh. So I suppose just the key trends that we've seen in terms of students who have a specific learning difficulty. They have, as I mentioned, they're the largest represented cohort among students with disabilities over the past 10 years consistently. So I think that's really important that we're having this webinar, because I suppose people often kind of think of disability and they think, you know, the physical, the sensory, and that's the most common, but it's not. Like specific learning difficulty is the most common in, I suppose, students going to higher education. In terms of what, I suppose, students with specific learning difficulties are likely to study, in the report, it actually breaks down what they're studying and it compares them with the general population, I suppose, as a whole, like all students with and without disabilities. And it also compares them with other students with disabilities. So in that report, we found that students with specific learning difficulties were less likely to study the field of arts and humanities than other students with disabilities. So that's kind of interesting, because I suppose arts and humanities, people always assume there's lots of reading or whatever. So that might reflect in terms of why they may not go down that route. And what they are actually very significantly more likely to study is actually engineering, manufacturing and construction. And that's actually more common for people who have a specific learning difficulty than the general population and the students with disabilities population. So that's a really interesting one as well. They're also twice as likely to study agriculture, forestry, fisheries and veterinary. They're twice as likely than the general population to study that particular field. So again, the report actually goes into a lot more detail in terms of, I suppose, what fields of studies and the percentages. So I would highly recommend that you download it. Maybe my colleague Lauren could actually find that link on the AHEAD website and share it in. That would be great. I suppose just one thing I kind of forgot to mention, that figure, which was nearly 16,000 students with disabilities. I suppose when we collected those stats, we basically sent out a questionnaire to all of the colleges and HEI in Ireland, and we asked them to return it to us. So 2 colleges didn't actually return the questionnaire to us. So those 2 colleges were GMIT and the Institute of Art and Design in Dún Laoghaire. And I suppose AIDT is very well known for actually having quite a high percentage of students with disabilities on campus. I think if memory serves, in previous reports where they have submitted, there was about 10 or 11% of students with disabilities in that particular college alone. So even though our numbers are saying just slightly under 16,000, it's going to be more than that. We know it is. And that's only people who disclose and actually registered with the Disability and Access Office. So it's not necessarily representative of, you know, it is exact number. It's what we know and what we have got from our research. So just kind of wanted to highlight that there is more people with disabilities and more people with dyslexia in college, but we may not have that figure. So next slide, Niamh. So I suppose just to kind of talk about WAM, Niamh already kind of gave a very brief introduction to the WAM programme, but I suppose for those of you who are new, we've been around since 2005, and I suppose our objective is really to widen access to employment for people with disabilities, for graduates with disabilities, and also to work and walk the line with employers to create attitudinal change in the hope that their mainstream recruitment practices will change and they will no longer need us and I'd be out of a job, and so would my team. But we've been around for 16 years and I suppose we've had a lot of learning over that time as well. So I'm going to just share some of our learning in terms of just a general sense, but also in terms of, I suppose, graduates with dyslexia as well. So next slide, please, Niamh. You might click on to the few other ones. Yeah, perfect. So in terms of our statistics to date, again, we have a report on our website that's available to view, but we've placed over 530 graduates to date. So they would have secured positions with both the public and the private sector. In that report that I have linked on that slide, we did an analysis basically of, I suppose, all the applications that came in through the programme. So about 1 in 5 applicants actually required an accommodation for an interview. So it really showed to us that 4 out of 5 candidates actually didn't need any support for an interview stage. But that's not to say they didn't need support in the workplace. But I suppose when you think of disability, you don't always get that disclosure initially. So it's really important to make sure your recruitment practices are inclusive as possible. I know Kiva is going to be talking about how you can make your recruitment practices inclusive for people with dyslexia as well. And in that report as well, we found that our workplace support, so as part of our grads starting on placement, we would do a workplace needs assessment. And we analysed over 200 needs assessments over a 7-year period. And we found that over 2/3 of the accommodations that we were recommending didn't actually cost any money. You know, it was very much in relation to work tasks and stuff. And then also we surveyed our graduates and tried to find out what happened to them after they finished their placement contract, because typically they would have been for 6 months minimum. Some contracts would have been for a year. So we kind of asked them what happened within that year after you finished your WAM placement contract. And 80% of our graduates secured employment as a direct result of their placement. So about half of them actually remained with the company or got an extension, and the other half got employment elsewhere. Only 9% of our graduates were still looking for work opportunity a year after they had finished up in that particular company. So really, really positive statistics that we have here in WAM. Next slide, please, Niamh. So in terms of the WAM programme and what our profile of people with dyslexia coming through the programme, so I kind of have a graph here that kind of combines some years together. So I suppose the first cohort would have started in 2006. So 2006, 2009, graduates with dyslexia would have represented 15% of our total grads with disabilities in the programme. So you can see it's kind of fluctuated between kind of 15%, it went up to 25%, and then 20% went up to 30%, kind of back down to 28%, 18% and 12%. So even though you see a dip, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We have been placing more graduates in recent years, and we have been seeing more and more graduates come through with multiple disabilities. And I suppose like very much what's represented in the higher education sector, you know, even though the percentage has decreased, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. It just means that there's more diverse range of disabilities going to higher education. And also, very similarly, if there's more people with disabilities, different kinds of disabilities coming on to the WAM programme. I suppose another thing that could be impacting, maybe we're not seeing high numbers of graduates with dyslexia coming to us anymore, is that there is more awareness out there. And I suppose with assistive technology advances, you know, that really has, I suppose, opened up a whole new world for people as well. So it's not the same as it was 10 years ago, where you would have had to buy licenses and stuff like that, would have cost about €1,000 or whatnot. You know, there's lots of apps on your phones now that you can get for free. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I don't want to take away from Kiva's presentation, but we'll just have the next slide, and I think I'll hand over to Kiva then. I suppose what we've learned in WAM over, I suppose, the 15 years, I've worked on WAM for nearly 9 years at this point. And I suppose over my 9 years, I've seen a shift from, I suppose, doing a face-to-face interview to moving more towards, I suppose, psychometric testing, group interviews and phone screenings. There's lots of different methods now for interviewing. It's not just a straightforward process anymore. It can be quite complicated. So what we've found is the psychometric testing is the biggest barrier for candidates with dyslexia. It's a time-sensitive environment. They have to read, I suppose, sections of text, and then they have to process it in verbal reasoning. You know, so it's actually quite stressful for people with dyslexia. So we found that is the biggest barrier. A normal kind of face-to-face interview, they're okay with, you know, usually, but when it comes to a timed, sensitive kind of exam almost, you know, that's what's the biggest barrier. That's the biggest hurdle for them to get through. That's what we found, certainly. And in terms of, I suppose, workplace supports, I actually forgot to put in the word supports there. The majority of workplace supports for people with dyslexia actually don't cost anything. So very much, like I mentioned, you know, 2/3 being not costing anything. For people with dyslexia, what we commonly recommend, it's not prescriptive, but it's just kind of what we see coming through, is very much clear instructions, giving very clear deadlines, making sure documents are accessible, providing templates, jargon busters around acronyms that are being used within a particular company. That those kind of things are always very helpful for people with dyslexia, but actually they're helpful for everybody. Sometimes proofreading and not being asked to take notes, those would be kind of some of the things that we would recommend for grads with dyslexia going into a job. And I suppose, as I mentioned, the cost of assistive technology has very much reduced considerably because of, you know, apps on your phones, and even the Windows features, the accessibility features are amazing now compared to 10 years ago. So I suppose just want to give a shout out to Ahead's Assistive Technology Hive. Has lots of great resources in there and actually categorized into different, I suppose, if you want to find technologies for reading or for learning, for note taking, you know, you can actually go into all of the sections and find out free apps or, you know, buy licenses or whatever. So Trevor Boland, my colleague, the e-learning and digital media officer, he kind of created that. And we actually very much welcome submissions. If you feel like we're missing something, you're very welcome to make a submission and we'll put that up on the AT Hive. So I think that's me, Niamh. Is that it? I think that's yeah. So perfect. So I'll hand back over to Niamh to introduce Kiva. So thanks very much, everyone.
Great, thanks so much, Caroline. Great, I'll just get Quiva to turn on your camera and your mic. So Quiva O'Malley is the Senior Adult Dyslexia Coordinator for Dyslexia Association of Ireland. She is responsible for the development of dyslexia supports for adults, including the development of in-person and online training to be delivered across the adult education and employment sectors. Quiva, how are you doing today?
Good, delighted to be here. Thank you for asking us.
We're delighted to have you. Do you want to share your screen there, just make sure it's working okay?
Okay, can you see that there now?
I can see that. Perfect, right. I'll let you go then.
Okay, super. I'm just going to minimize the chat there. Okay, perfect. So you kindly introduced to me there. My name is Quiva O'Malley and I'm the Senior Adult Dyslexia Coordinator at the Dyslexia Association of Ireland. Because a little bit of a tongue twister, from now on, I tend to refer to the Dyslexia Association of Ireland. I use DAI. So if you hear me using DAI, that's just my abbreviation for the Dyslexia Association of Ireland. Just to highlight, my email address is there on the screen, and we'll also be getting a copy of these slides, so you will have it. And you can contact me at any stage, whether it's about possibly training or you have you know, follow-up questions or anything like that. Please feel free to get in contact. Okay. So just to start with, Niamh's going to launch a Mentimeter in a moment. So just a question that I want you to respond to is, when I say dyslexia, what is the first thing that pops into your mind? Now, there is no right or wrong answer here. I just want to get a sense of, you know, what it is when you think of dyslexia. What it is for employers, you know, the first thing that pops into their mind, what are they thinking? So I'm going to ask Niamh to launch that there, please.
Quiva, you're going to have to stop sharing for me to share, actually.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, you're fine.
Makes sense.
Perfect. And Lauren, if you wouldn't mind just popping the code for the Mentimeter into the chat box. There we go. Yeah, so just to let people know, if you have your phone handy, you pop onto www.menti.com and then it'll ask you for a code. So the code is on the top of the screen, but it's also in the chat box. So I'll just read it out. So it's 3822 8647.
Okay, so if you would stop there, Niamh, I think we're getting a good sense of where people are at. Okay, so sorry, Niamh, would you be able to share the word bubble, the word cloud, just for one moment? Perfect, thank you. And so just to highlight, this is really, really common. Whenever I ask this question, these are the responses that I tend to receive, you know, spelling difficulties, reading difficulties, writing difficulties. And it does tend, most people think of challenges associated with dyslexia. When they think of dyslexia, they think of all the difficulties that somebody may experience. And this tends to be what people do know about dyslexia. And while it's incredibly important that we are aware of the challenges that a dyslexic individual may encounter, and so we can put in appropriate support, so we can understand and support our colleagues and employees, it's also equally important that we understand and know all of the positives and the strengths that dyslexia brings. Our individuals with dyslexia have amazing qualities and abilities that they bring to the workplace. And we need to know these so we can play to our individuals with dyslexia, play to their strengths, you know, in terms of getting, let's say, the best out of them in the workplace, so that they can fulfill all aspects of their role and achieve success. But also, how we put supports in place, how we support individuals with dyslexia by playing to their strengths. So, for example, if somebody has, you know, strong verbal skills, it is, you know, one of the strengths that we can, sorry, just see that my volume is low.
Yeah, I think it might be your microphone, Kiva. If you want to hold up your microphone from your headphones nearer to your mouth, that would be great.
Let's see. Is that any better?
That's much better. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I was in there about, you know, playing to an individual's strengths. And it's also how we put reasonable accommodations in place. So if somebody might have, you know, difficulty with reading or writing, but they have, you know, strong verbal skills and expression, we can put support in place, you know, to play to the strength. We can use dictation, you know, assistive technology such as dictation, or, you know, instead of maybe asking somebody to write a report, can they present their findings? And, you know, it could be a pre-recorded video, or it could be, you know, a quick presentation on the team meeting. And so, you know, it is incredibly important that we are aware of all of the strengths that a dyslexic individual brings to the table. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to ask you to stop sharing there, and I'm going to return to my slides. Now we are going to do 2 dyslexic simulations. So the first dyslexic simulation is to try and give you a sense of what it's like to be dyslexic and have the reading difficulties. What is going on under the surface, behind the scenes for individuals with dyslexia. And the second simulation is a writing simulation. So you will need a pen and paper for this simulation. And again, these simulations are just to try and raise awareness of dyslexia. The difficulties that somebody might be having, they aren't always evident. We don't always know how hard somebody's working behind the scenes. So I'm going to begin with the reading simulation, and we have 2 separate pages from an article. And what's going to happen is I'm going to go to the screen, and we're going to have page 1, and I'm going to time you. We're going to have a minute to read that. And then I will turn over to page 2 of the article. And it's the same process. You will have a minute to read that. And then we're going to come back to the wider group and just have a quick discussion on findings, what happened, you know, throughout the simulation for people. So I'm just going to get my timer here. When I flick over the screen, we're going to have a minute to read page 1. And your time starts now. perfect. And your time is up. Now, exact same process, page 2 of the article, 1 minute, and your time is going to start now. Perfect. And time's finished there. Now back to the wider group, and you can enter into the chat box. Wondering, do people have to put strategies in place for the first article, or was it a more natural process? I put the article up on the screen, asked you to read, and then people just read. And also I'm wondering what happened in the second article? Was it the same thing, that it was a very natural, straightforward process?
Eva, can I just jump in there for a second? There is a strange echo coming, and it's a little bit difficult to hear you. I don't know, would it be possible to take out your earphones?
Yeah, just give me 1 minute. I'll change my headset and see if that makes a difference.
Perfect,
if
thank
people
you.
want to just continue answering those questions in the chat box, I might
Perfect.
just change here and see. Okay, perfect. Is that any better?
I think I can still hear a bit of an echo.
You know, I think it's my laptop. I can hear it as well.
Because at the start now, I couldn't hear it at all. And then it kind of just came in as an echo. Oh, actually, some people are saying the sound is good now.
Good now. Can people hear me? Okay.
Oh, talk again there for a second.
Can you hear me now?
There's like a funny buzz now when you talk.
Actually, I now that you've said it, I can hear it. And you're right, it wasn't present earlier.
Yeah.
It seems to be coming from my laptop. And I put it out so it's not charging. 100%.
Would it be worth just unplugging your headset completely and just using the mic on the laptop? Would that work?
Okay, how's that now?
I feel like it's better. But I don't know if anybody in the chat or if maybe Caroline wants to come in there.
Yeah, I think we'll kind of see how it goes once you start speaking, Kiva. Apologies about that. There was a bit of feedback, I think, on the headphones and stuff. So let's try and see how it goes. Hopefully it'll be okay.
Perfect. Yeah, it's no problem. Okay, super. Yeah, a lot of people are saying that they sound better now. So yeah, hopefully it stays. Okay, so I'm just going to pull up the chat box just to see how people are getting on. So yeah, the first one definitely got through. The second one, it took more time and it was very stressful. Yeah, second, very difficult to follow. Yeah, I was unsure if I was reading the content correctly. Certainly, yeah, most people are just getting the gist of it. Like the first one doing. Okay, that's really interesting. There's an individual here who read the first article in under a minute and only got one sentence in the second article. Yeah, so, and that's extremely common. These are the responses that I hear all the time, you know. Yeah, and people just maybe guessing at what the words were, and comprehension has come up a lot. You know, to fully comprehend the article, it's quite difficult. Okay, and some people did highlight this, but how did you guys feel during the task? Yeah, there's somebody getting a headache, and this is actually something that a lot of dyslexic individuals will tell you. Reading under, whether it's under pressure or, you know, reading in employment, it can be very stressful. And like that, people are talking about strains in the lives, but there is pain. People saying my head hurts, I've got it, you know, I'm getting headaches because they have to concentrate so incredibly hard, put in so much effort into reading these articles, that it does, you know, produce feelings, you know, of frustration, yes, stress, yeah, super, yeah. Then second one, irritating. And that is important to highlight. I sometimes do this with educators, and what a lot of them will say to me is, I gave up. I gave up in the second article. But yet we constantly expect our employers, or our employees, or our students to read all of these articles and to be able to interact, comprehend what's going on, and remember the details for either a discussion, you know, in the environment, or for whether it's in, you know, a report or an essay or things like that. It is really, really difficult. Perfect. Thank you for sharing there. I just want to highlight the aim of that. The aim of that particular simulation is to try and show you when we have to slow down enough that we have to decode every word in a passage. It makes reading really, really difficult, but it also makes it very difficult to gain enough fluency to fully comprehend what we're reading. Therefore, that it means an individual with dyslexia may have to do a lot of rereading, which is extremely tiresome. And like people pointed out there, it causes frustration, anxiety, and stress. And so it's important that we remember this, and especially, you know, with in the workplace, sometimes people are asked to read under pressure. So it's 10 minutes before a meeting and somebody sees a document that's going to be discussed at a meeting. If you have these difficulties, 10 minutes may not be enough, and you're expected to fully comprehend this, you know, paper or report, and fully comprehend, have, you know, current and logical arguments and opinions and feedback on it, and bring it to a meeting and verbalize all of this in front of your peers in a very short time frame. That can cause huge amount of anxiety, frustration, and difficulty for someone with dyslexia. So it is incredibly important that we are aware of this. If we're asking somebody to do a huge amount of reading, you know, be very mindful of the deadline or the time frame you're giving somebody. You know, give them enough time to put in their strategies, their techniques, to use assistive technology to be able to fully interact with the material. Give them enough time that if they have to reread the article 5 times, 10 times to fully interact with it, that they have that time. Or even better still, why don't, you know, we kind of have that UDL mindset where we're you know, producing material in different formats. We're not relying on one single, you know, piece of paper with written text on it. Okay, perfect. So thank you, everyone, for sharing there. And now I'm going to move on to the writing simulation. It's very similar to the reading one. We're going to have 2 different tasks, and they are again going to be timed. Okay. So again, first thing, you know, so when I flick over the screen, your instructions are going to be on the screen. You're going to have a minute to read your instructions and complete the task. Okay, and remember, it has to be done via pen and paper. Okay, I'm just going to get my timer, and your time has started. Perfect. So our time's up. And we're going to finish writing task 1. Now, same thing, I'm going to flick over the screen and writing task 2 is going to come up. We're going to have the same length of time to interpret all the instructions and to complete the task. And your time is started. Perfect. And finish up that task. Now again, into the chat box, okay? How did you feel while you're writing the first paragraph? And then how did you feel while you're writing the second paragraph? The same process, all straightforward and easy. Chat box. Stressed for both. Yeah, I wrote about 5 words in the second one. First one, yeah, it was fine, really challenging. Yeah, somebody has just taken shown there and highlighted first article 40 words, second article 9. But the discrepancy, you know, there is a big difference there. Yeah, not enough time. Yeah, and there's one. I didn't get I got the instructions read, understood, but then I was out of time, so I couldn't actually complete the task. Yeah, and what makes it extremely difficult here is I'm putting that time pressure on people, and that makes it more difficult. So think about if you're dyslexic and you have these difficulties around reading and writing and spelling, right? How, you know, and we continually put this emphasis on people's, you know, being successful and their abilities based on, you know, how they read, how they write. We put these time conditions, deadlines, you know, that sometimes, you know, can be very, very tight, and we were expecting this perfect report to be produced. Yeah, very, very challenging. That's what most people are saying. Imagine if that was your experience every day and you had to write for your job and to read and write, and this was your experience. This is what's going on behind the scene, under the surface for people on a daily basis. Okay, perfect. Yeah, and that I just want to highlight there the third question. Anybody feel that the second paragraph is a true reflection of their abilities and intelligence? And somebody put in, no, I don't think this was a reflection of my ability, and would hate if I was judged on it. And think about it. How often do we judge somebody on their written work? You know, think about all of our exams. Think about even, you know, when we're doing training in the workplace, and we're asking people to continue to write. In interview sessions, we're asking people, you know, to write in timed conditions. They're stressed. For so many, they don't have assistive technology to hand in, you know, in these environments. And that's really difficult. But also, if you're being judged and you know when you're producing this work, you know, that it doesn't truly reflect your knowledge, your skills, your abilities, it's really, really difficult to take, and it does impact on your self-esteem and your confidence. And this is why it's so incredibly important that we're moving away from that more traditional setting where, you know, we kind of assess and we expect everybody to have certain standards of reading and writing, and this is the only way you can produce a work. It is the only way you can produce a report is to write 20 pages in the play. And it's, you know, we need to be moving towards this universal design mindset. We need to be thinking of the dyslexia-friendly environment. Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for everyone sharing there. And now I'm going to move in. I highlight this next letter. It's quite wordy. I do understand that one. I'm going to put up on the screen. Now, this is from an individual who was identified with dyslexia at 28 years of age. Okay, and this was kind of part of her journey of her new kind of identification and her new identity as an individual with dyslexia. Right? It's a huge emotional roller coaster when, especially if we're identified with dyslexia late in life. But why I'm highlighting this is because these feelings that this individual talks about are extremely common. I hear this all the time, and it's incredibly important as employers that we are aware of these feelings that have gone on, you know, for so many years for people, and especially, you know, around the education system. And we bring these into adulthood, we bring these into the workplace. When you leave school, you don't pack up all of these feelings and negative experiences, you know, and leave them in the school. They influence, you know, they influence maybe how people act in the workplace. I've seen so many people that have had their confidence knocked, that they've got a job and they won't maybe apply for promotions, they won't put themselves out there or put themselves forward because they're so afraid of, you know, getting it wrong, and they're afraid of maybe other people's reactions, how they're going to be judged, because they have been judged negatively maybe and incorrectly for years. So this, you know, individual, she talks about trying harder than everyone else to please, but she still couldn't spell the words or put the letters together to read. And how do you not feel stupid when everyone else is learning something that you can't grasp at the same pace? This is really, really difficult, you know, and it really, really impacts on an individual, okay? And remember, these experiences, these feelings, they're not just a once-off. They're day in, day out, year after year. This idea of trying hard, we hear this so much in education, but also in the workplace. So many people, if you just paid a bit of attention, if you just worked a little bit harder, you know, that would have been a great report. Or, God, yeah, if you put in a bit more effort, you know, you could be really good. You know, and the dyslexic individual is thinking, I am working so incredibly hard. I don't have anything else to give. I'm giving over 100%, right? And I can't work any harder. And that's a really difficult message to take, because someone is telling you that you're not good enough just as you are, right? And so we have to be extremely mindful of the messages, our words that we use when we're talking to somebody, okay? And also this shame of not being able to read out loud without stuttering or misspelling, you know, and the fear of being called on by teachers was paralyzing. Okay, and this individual, you know, we're talking primary schools, she was having panic attacks of this fear. This is something that sometimes stays with the dyslexic individual. They're going into meetings and there's that fear. They feel anxiety, stressed, and they're terrified that they're going to be called on in a meeting, maybe to read something, maybe to answer a question, and they won't be able to, or they're going to say the wrong thing, or they'll mix up their words or mispronounce their words, and all of that, you know, judgment comes flooding back. That fear and that shame is still really, really present for so many people with dyslexia. So we have to be incredibly mindful of this, okay? Because all of these experiences send out messages to people. And for so many dyslexic individuals, the message was that they just weren't good enough, right? And in the workplace, it's so incredibly important. We're not replicating this message, right? We need to be changing the script. We need to ensure that we fully understand dyslexia, that we're supporting our individuals with dyslexia, and we are creating that safe dyslexia environment. You know, it's that inclusive environment where we're reducing barriers. We're making sure that there's equity and equality for everybody, and everybody has the chance to reach their full potential and have success. And it's that move, you know, towards a more social model of disability. And collectively, you know, as a society, we all have a responsibility here to try and remove the barriers that have been put in place. And we also have an onus and responsibility. We cannot keep throwing it onto the individual with the disability that it's their fight and their fight alone. It's all of our fight. We need to ensure that we're supporting neurodiverse individuals, that we are creating inclusive, supportive workplaces. Okay, so at DAI, our vision would be for a dyslexia-friendly society, where everybody with dyslexia is enabled to reach their full potential. And this again is that social model of disability, that is that inclusive society that celebrates differences and that removes barriers so that everybody has a level playing field to achieve. It's also incredibly important to DAI, and we strongly advocate that every child and adult with dyslexia has a right for this for it to be identified. Okay, it's extremely empowering and it's life-changing to be identified with dyslexia. If we think about that individual who wrote that letter, she mentioned at the start that she was 6 years of age when she knew she was different. It wasn't until she was 28 years of age that she was identified with dyslexia. That's 22 years of feeling that there's something wrong with you, that you are not good enough, that you're different, that you were stupid, that you're not clever, right? Continually receiving these messages. And identification of dyslexia has the power to change that, right? It tells you that you are good enough just as you are, that you think differently, and that you are in no way stupid, that, you know, dyslexia does not impact IQ. It's just you learn differently, and once you know where your strengths and challenges are and you're in a supportive environment, you will reach your full potential. And also it is important that we have appropriate supports. And when we say appropriate supports, that is that move away from this one size fits all. I see it, you know, too often where somebody has disclosed that they're dyslexic and follow-up email arrives and they're just given these kind of generic supports. There's no conversation with the individual. And it is incredibly important. We have to have that conversation with the individual, because dyslexia is really, really complex and it impacts people differently. Therefore, they're going to have different challenges, different strengths. So they will need different supports. So it has to be a more individualized support system that we're introducing. Okay. So at DAI, we define dyslexia as a learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling. Okay. So dyslexia occurs despite access to appropriate learning opportunities, and it's characterized by cognitive difficulties in phonological processing. So this kind of our ability to recognize, manipulate and remember, you know, and work with sounds in the spoken language. And this does, if you have phonological processing difficulties, it is going to impact on your reading, your writing, your spelling, and sometimes your speech. Okay. Also, there can be working memory difficulties, and this is around kind of short-term and working memory difficulties. And this is really important to know, especially in the workplace, because sometimes what happens is somebody's given instructions and deadlines and a lot of information through one means, through one channel. So let's say the information is verbalized, right? And then you've given them 4 different tasks, maybe 2 different deadlines that they have to produce it, and then you're gone. If somebody with dyslexia, if their working memory or short-term memory is impacted, they may forget some of those instructions, so therefore they can't complete the tasks. So it's incredibly important that if you are verbalizing your instructions, that you're following them up with, you know, a bullet point, a short little Word document or an email or something. So somebody has that kind of blueprint, something to refer back to make sure that they're completing all the tasks that have been asked of them and that they are aware of the deadlines, so they can plan appropriately for them. Also, the speed of retrieval of information from the long-term memory can be impacted. And this is why we say one of the greatest gifts that you can give dyslexic is time. Okay, don't expect an immediate response. It does take time to process the question that you've been asked, to find the answer in your long-term memory, to bring forward, but also to arrange your response, your thoughts, put them into kind of a coherent, logical manner before you speak. That can't be instant, and if we expect instant and demand instant responses, that's when sometimes a dyslexic can become quite distressed and maybe, you know, mispronounce words, but also maybe give the wrong answer, or their mind can go blank and they literally can't pull the information. And that's really difficult, because it's like, if we think of the other simulations, where you know deep down you have the ability, you have the knowledge on this. If you were just given a little bit more time, you would have been able to produce, you know, a great answer, a great response in the team meeting or something like that. And so it's hard to receive these knocks. So it is important that we're, you know, that we're giving our dyslexic individuals time. Okay. So dyslexia comes from 2 Greek words, dys meaning difficulty or pain, and lexia meaning language or words. So the difficulty with language that can also impact our auditory processing, our reading, writing and spelling, and our speech. And for so many, as we've seen at the start of Mentimeter, you're aware of reading, writing and spelling challenges. Not everybody realizes auditory processing and speech. Auditory processing can be impacted. So let's say for me, my auditory processing is impacted. And sometimes that can be quite difficult. So if I'm in maybe a one-to-one meeting, if somebody, and somebody is maybe asking questions, or they're giving me, a summary of a report, and then I'm meant to respond to that. For me, I have to put in strategies in place. I have to try and minimize all the stimuli, all the different distractions that might be in that meeting, but I also have to minimize all of my other senses that I'm using. So what I tend to do is I look away and I find a blank spot on the wall. So it means all my other senses are minimized and I'm just listening to the words that somebody is saying to me. And then I'm able to formulate my response, and then I come back and I'm making kind of eye contact and responding. But that can be difficult because not everybody maybe understands or, why I may be doing this, or then I'm putting strategies in place. And more often than not, I've had different comments where, people say, oh, am I boring you, Creefa? Gone off in a little daydream, or are you lost? Or, not too much longer, Creefa, and we'll be done. I'm not disengaged. I'm not that kind of bad employee that, it's gone off daydreaming when I'm talking to my colleague or an important meeting or something like that. And this does provide kind of put up a dilemma for me, because what can happen is I'm left, do I tell the person that I'm dyslexic and this is a strategy I'm putting in place? Or do I leave them think that I'm not that good of an employee and I just zone out when somebody's talking to me? And also, and this sometimes comes down to social norms. I'm well aware of social norms. I'm well aware of, the importance of eye contact and that in conversations. But sometimes I can't, maintain it because of some challenges around dyslexia. So we have to be aware of how we respond if somebody is doing something that may seem a little bit different to how the majority of people act in a meeting. It's not that we're bad, but it's not that we're disengaged. Sometimes it's strategies we're putting in place to ensure that we're properly, correctly interpreting the information and then responding to it appropriately. Okay. Also speech, sometimes speech can be impacted. I know for me, I'm sorry, anybody who's using the closed captions, I can't guarantee what's coming up on them for you. Sometimes my speech is impacted, and it's because my phonological awareness is deeply impacted. And it's quite challenging for me. So sometimes my sounds, I blend words maybe incorrectly. It does mean then, like the likes of closed captions or sometimes dictation, doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. So it can be problematic. So it is important to be aware of that. Okay. So again, when we're thinking about dyslexia, right, it is a different way of thinking. Okay, our brains are wired differently, which means that we can excel at certain things, but we can have real challenges, and these become more evident in traditional environments. So if we think about, the traditional, banking style of education, or maybe even in a more traditional workplace, where there is so much emphasis on somebody's ability to read and write, and that's how everything is kind of being assessed. Read that report, it's 20 pages long, and then we're going to discuss it in the afternoon, or write up your feedbacks and comments and things like that on it. That can be very difficult, and that's where maybe more challenges might become more evident. Okay, so the dyslexic brain does process information differently, which might manifests itself in reading, writing, spelling challenges. But also be aware it creates amazing opportunities and abilities, and we need to be aware of these. And we need to be playing to these, especially in the workplace, because if not, you're missing out on a huge talent pool. Okay, it's important to know that dyslexia is legally recognised as a disability in Ireland. Okay, so therefore an employer does have an obligation to make reasonable accommodations and put adjustments in place to support your dyslexic staff members. I also highlight this for another reason, because sometimes on forms, when we're asking people to disclose, we say, have you got a disability? Right? A lot of people with dyslexia take no. Some because they don't class their dyslexia as a disability, or others because they don't realise that it is actually legally recognised as a disability in Ireland. So sometimes maybe changing the wording on that can help somebody, making the choice to disclose or not. So, things like, maybe just asking, is there anything else that you need to be aware of to, ensure that you're fully supporting the individual. And so your wording is incredibly important, because as well as a dyslexic individual, the wording that you use they are reading into that to see, is this a safe environment? Is it inclusive? If I disclose that I'm dyslexic, what is going to be the follow-on? What is going to happen to people? Do they have a correct understanding of dyslexia, or do they have this negative understanding that I'm not going to be able to do my job? Okay, so here is some kind of common co-occurring difficulties that we see a lot with individuals with dyslexia. For many, as adults, they have introduced a huge amount of techniques and strategies to kind of overcome these difficulties. So a lot of them you mightn't even realise, that somebody might have difficulties in this. If we think of directional skills, one of the kind of common ones that everyone thinks of when they think of dyslexia is that inability to tell left from right. But however, you'll see so many people put strategies in place. I've worked with people that would constantly have a certain maybe bracelet on their left hand in a specific colour. So it means it's that visual prompt, that reminder, and things like that. So again, telling the time, sometimes on the traditional clock face, it can be difficult to tell the time. But let's say using a phone, or even using some assistive technology on your phone, it eliminates that difficulty. So it's not sometimes extremely evident. What sometimes for people with dyslexia in the workplace can be difficult is maybe this kind of coordination of team meetings. So let's just say, for example, you're at a team meeting, you're listening to what's being discussed. You're also trying to process that information so you can respond appropriately, but you're also taking notes so that you will remember, because remember, short-term difficulties, so you want to be able to remember this in a few days, so you have to take notes. That can be quite difficult for somebody, and especially a dyslexic individual. So it's why we say, let people, dyslexic individuals, record meetings. Again, you're putting in, a kind of a policy in place. It could be something like they're allowed to record the meeting. They can listen back to the recording twice, make notes, and then it has to be deleted. So you do have some maybe formal agreement going on. Sometimes it can be difficulty planning, sequencing, and organising written text. And this, again, we're thinking of kind of universal design, maybe, where we're saying if somebody has these difficulties, and for some, this assistive technology isn't always, the magic bullet. It doesn't alleviate everybody's challenges. So then, we're thinking about, does it have to be produced in a written format, or can we have an alternative format? Can we have, a pre-recorded video, a presentation, something like that, instead of continually, getting people to write their reports, their texts, things like that. Also, if somebody has difficulty planning and sequencing, what can help for them is some form of a template. So even maybe, during their, at the start when they're settling into work, you could work together on a kind of, with a supervisor or a line manager, or kind of a peer mentor or something like that, to create these templates for your emails, for your reports, for different processes that go on in your workplace. Time management and organisational skills can be impacted, and it is good practice that we encourage everybody, not just our individuals with dyslexia, but we encourage everybody to introduce good time management skills and strategies. But for dyslexic individuals, it is really important that they're putting these in place. So you're talking about, maybe at the start of the day, they're taking 10-15 minutes to organise their day, they're prioritising tasks, they're setting up their reminders and things like that. Looking, what meetings do I have? What's coming up tomorrow, the next day? Do I have to do any work for the meeting tomorrow, whatever? And they're planning this in the morning. But it's also really important that they're checking back in at different times throughout the day. Sometimes what happens is we make this wonderful plan at the start of the day. If we don't check back in until maybe 5 o'clock when we're clocking off, and then we look and go, okay, I didn't actually get anything done on my to-do list because I veered off a different little, side path or path. So it is important that our individuals are checking back maybe at lunchtime, again in the afternoon before they finish up at the end of the day, to keep on track. And what sometimes can happen when we're talking about time management is an individual may start on a task and they're saying, okay, I only really have an hour for this, but they get maybe into the task, maybe take a detour, and suddenly 2-3 hours has passed for them. And then that puts a huge amount of pressure on the rest of the day. So it is important that we're saying to, our individuals, set a timer on your phone. If you can only dedicate an hour today to do, to start the first draft of a report or something like that. It is important to, maintain that time so we can set a reminder. That buzz will kind of take you out of that intense trance that you might be in, and keep you on track so that you are fulfilling all the tasks that you have to do in that day. It's important to know that dyslexia has been linked through research with low self-esteem and confidence. This tends to be because of maybe past negative experiences. So it is, as I say, really important that we're changing that script, that in no way are we replicating or reinforcing those negative messages that people have received in the past. We're giving everyone a fair and equal opportunity and a level playing field to ensure that they have success and can fulfill all aspects of their role. So as I mentioned before, there is a huge amount of strengths associated with being dyslexic that, as an employer, these are what you should be playing to. I recently worked with an individual, and it's a very positive story, thankfully, because a lot of the times it does tend to be, I might hear maybe negative experiences of somebody, but an individual who successfully got a new job that he tendered for. And when he went to meet the vice president of the institution, they discussed more in depth what the job was going to entail and what was expected of him. And he realised there was a huge emphasis going to be on writing. This he knows as being dyslexic, he knows that this may not be, or isn't, as he would say, one of his strong points. And it would bring a huge amount of stress, but it would also add to his workload, because he's saying, I know I wouldn't be able to kick off at 5 o'clock. What would happen to me is that I would be working late into the evenings, I'd be working on weekends and things like that. And I just know it would impact my mental health, my self-confidence, my esteem, and my work-life balance, and it would be extremely difficult. So he made the choice. He contacted the vice president of the organisation and called a meeting. And he explained, he said, I'm going to have to decline the offer of the job. I did not realise that there was so much emphasis, and writing was such a big part of the job. And the vice president said, oh my God, is that it? He said, don't worry, we have hundreds of people here who love writing, who excel at writing. We do not have 100 people who have your skill set, who have the strengths, right? That's what we need. The skills and the strengths you have, this is what the team is looking for, right? So they worked together on a plan. And one of his colleagues worked very closely with him and would do all the report writing and the writing that was needed. And he got to play to his strengths, of all the his creative kind of solutions, his ability to see the bigger picture and problem solve, but also his fantastic people skills and verbal skills he was playing to. So it is important that we understand all of the strengths that dyslexic individual brings and the positives they bring to the workplace. Okay, so we're talking about a dyslexia-friendly environment, and this is that inclusive environment, right? And we're not saying change the world just to suit a dyslexic. This environment is inclusive and everybody benefits from. So we're talking about a safe environment based on Carol Rogers' core conditions. So we're thinking of being, genuine, empathetic, positive regards. It's based on respect. These are the key foundations, and they are strong foundations. If you can introduce this safe environment, and it really helps with a dyslexic individual with their competence, but also around disclosure. If they feel that the environment is safe and is accepting and inclusive, they're more likely to disclose to you. So it's incredibly important that we're offering individuals with dyslexia feedback, but it's constructive feedback. I've so many times have individuals who come to me and say, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. They keep telling me that I'm writing the reports wrong or I'm doing something wrong, but nobody tells me how to do it right. Nobody tells me exactly, okay, A, B, and C is wrong, but this is how A, B, and C should look like. So again, this is where maybe your templates or examples come into play. Also be positive, highlight what somebody's doing really well and things like that. But it is when we're talking to somebody, and if somebody is doing something wrong, we should be showing them what is right, what is expected, what is the standard that is expected of them. It's not enough, and it's not fair just to say to somebody that's wrong, you're doing it wrong, and give them nothing else. And we're talking about that scaffolding approach where we're supporting our individuals, your universal design is extremely important. The UDL mindset for the workplace. I know UDL is mostly associated with education, but that UDL mindset can really, really benefit a workplace. You know, if we take the principles of UDL, and AHEAD have a fantastic resource section on their website on UDL, so you know, there's loads of videos and information, and they also run courses on UDL. So again, you can find other information there. They also have a fantastic article on UDL mindset for the workplace that is in their AHEAD journal, and the link is going to be put into the chat box later. Okay. So also assistive technology. This is, as Caroline mentioned earlier, it can really ease and help dyslexic individuals, you know, with some of the challenges or the areas that they may find more difficult. And again, we're talking about using assistive technology to play to our strengths. And it is important to remember, this doesn't, you know, the financial aspect, this is what a lot of people think, oh, assistive tech is going to cost me a lot. And I do get employers, you know, contacting me, and sometimes it would be, I have a dyslexic individual who interview stage, they've done really, really well, but I'm wondering how much is it going to cost me to hire them, right? Wherein the cost, to be honest, with the dyslexic individual tends to be minimal, as Caroline pointed out earlier, because a lot of it is this kind of dyslexia-friendly environment that isn't costing. It's time, it's thinking ahead of, you know, creating templates, how we communicate with somebody, you know, putting in UDL practices. But also there is so much assistive technology that is free, that's inbuilt to our phones, to our computers. And I know Caroline mentioned that AT Hive, they have a lot of information about assistive technology. Also at DAI, on our YouTube channel, we have numerous different videos highlighting pieces of software, and a lot is free and is inbuilt, you know, in everybody's computer and phone. And we highlight, you know, how to use them, also, you know, kind of pros and cons of them. So again, that's something that, you know, you can be looking at if you're thinking about introducing assistive tech. Okay, so I'm going to slide to this. This environment, and the reason that we call for it is because it does promote equality and equity, but it also levels the playing field. It removes a lot of barriers that are put in place, you know, and that dyslexic individual, it means that maybe they can't reach their full potential because of these barriers. So if we remove them, we're allowing somebody, you know, to reach their full potential, to have success. And we're talking about raising their confidence and their self-esteem as well, talking about proper supports, you know, in the workplace, that individualized supports, but also that inclusive environment where everybody plays a part. Okay. And we're allowing and encouraging people, you know, to demonstrate their true abilities and knowledge and things like that. And by giving maybe information ahead of time, minutes, agendas, reports, before meetings, we're allowing somebody to interact with that material, so they're coming to a meeting more prepared, more confident, able to talk and truly demonstrate their knowledge and their skills and areas. Okay, so disclosure. First of all, if you're an individual with dyslexia and you're thinking about disclosure, AHEAD have produced a fantastic booklet on disclosure, well worth a read, but also maybe as an employer, it is worth noting it, because it does highlight why people maybe, you know, aren't disclosing. Also that kind of the balance of what people are thinking of when they, you know, the questions that they're asking themselves when they're trying to decide whether they'll disclose or not. Right? But it is important to be aware you're not expected to be the expert in every disability. So, you know, if somebody says to you, you know, that they're coming to disclose about dyslexia or something, you know, you can contact us beforehand and maybe have a conversation about dyslexia. You know, what is it? How can it impact an individual? You know, maybe examples of different supports and strategies that you can put in place. And then you're coming a bit more prepared to the meeting with your individual, your employee with dyslexia. Because sometimes what can happen is people, and they find it very disrespectful, is that somebody, literally they'll often say to me, it's like they just quickly Googled dyslexia before I walked into the room, and they read the first paragraph that came up on Google, and they think they know all about it, right? You can see through that really, you know, really quick, really easily. And there is no harm in saying to somebody, I'm not fully aware of dyslexia, or you know, maybe I don't know if I fully understand everything. So let's have a conversation about it. The individual with dyslexia is an expert in their own dyslexia because they know how it impacts them. So again, having that conversation is incredibly important. Okay. Also, make sure that you have your procedures, you know, that they are clear and that they're also open. That so when somebody is weighing up that decision, will I disclose or not, they know the process. Okay, if I go and disclose, this is what the procedure, this is what's going to happen. Too many people come to me and say, I'm after disclosing, and it's a month down the line and nobody has got back to ask me, you know, anything about supports or adjustments or assistive technology. It's really like, oh, thank you very much for telling me you're dyslexic. Case closed, what am I going to do with it? So it is important that somebody knows what the process is. Because like for that individual recently who had said that to me, that she disclosed and she was a month later and nobody had got back to her about anything, she was saying, well, what was the point in disclosing? I went in there, I've made myself extremely vulnerable, and you know, I was really open and honest about them, but for what reason? Because there was no follow-up, there was no support afterwards. So it is important that you have clear procedures in place. Also, you know, tell somebody what is going to happen with the information. Somebody's educational psychologist report is very personal and very sensitive to them. So it is important that they know where it's been stored, who has access to it. And also, if they're disclosing, who else is going to know about the dyslexia? You know, are you going to be having a conversation with somebody else? Because you need their permission, you know, if you were to go and talk to their line manager or something like that. So it is important that we're telling them, you know, what happens with their information and their disclosure. Okay. So
if I jump in for 2 seconds, there's a bit, just less than 10 minutes, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm going to fly through just
Great.
the style guide, and it's been mentioned there's numerous different webinars, and you can find more information on our website about a style guide. And this should be for making all of your documents accessible, but it should also apply to all forms of communication. A lot of times people think about maybe for external you know, forms of communication, and they tend to forget about internal and their emails. But so it's incredibly important that we're thinking of, you know, our readable fonts, we're structuring, we're putting headings in place, you know, we're highlighting or, you know, putting in bold important text that we want to emphasize. We're thinking about, you know, chunking ideas, and even the layout visually, we're talking about maybe a little off-white, you know, background, but also don't have a chaotic, maybe crazy background with loads of patterns or even pictures in the background that can be extremely distracting and difficult. You know, we're talking about having, you know, left alignment text. Sometimes justified text can be quite difficult for a dyslexic individual to read, especially if they have tracking difficulties or things like that. Also be really mindful of your language, especially if there's instructions in this form of you know, communication. Be really clear, be concise. If you are putting in abbreviations, you know, make sure that you either have you know, a little guide at, you know, page highlighting the abbreviations, or maybe at the very start, you know, if it's, let's say, Dyslexia Association of Ireland, and then you've DAI in brackets, then that's okay, we can use DAI afterwards. But all of these abbreviations sometimes can be quite difficult for a dyslexic individual, so it is important. Okay, so I'm quite conscious of the time, so I'm just going to highlight these are kind of just points that, you know, kind of take home and nearly like kind of a summary of what was spoken about, of what you can do in your workplace. I'm going to finish up on that, and I'm going to ask Niamh very quickly if we could just launch the second Menti initiative. So this is just really quickly, guys. When we think of dyslexia, what now are we thinking? You know, what is popping into our mind when we think of dyslexia? Creativity, ability. Strength, brilliant. Supports inclusion. Empathy, yes, I really like that. Safe disclosure, fantastic. Accessible environment, brilliant. Assistive technology. Okay, I love that difference. At the start, we were thinking about all the different challenges. We were thinking of, reading and writing, spelling difficulties. And now it's nearly like it's flipped. We're thinking of it's just a different way of working that brings about a huge amount of strengths. And if we create that inclusive way, inclusive environments, we're supporting our dyslexic individuals, we're easing their challenges and ensuring a level playing field and success. So perfect. So thank you so much for all your interactions and for listening to me for the last hour. I do realize I went over a bit over time, so apology, guys. Communication side. Yeah, perfect. And as I said, if you have any follow-up questions or you want to get in touch, my slides will be sent over to you and my contact details are going to be on them. So please feel free to get in touch with me if you want to follow up on anything.
Thank you so much for that. It was so interesting, but also so interactive. And the chat there was so much chat going on that people were really interacting with it. Thank you so much for that. Caroline, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, just to say, Kiva, I actually attended your Dyslexia in the Workplace course. So you have a course available, isn't that right? Just to promo yourself, promo DAI, Workaway.
Yeah.
I did a 4-week course, and like as I mentioned, I've worked in AHEAD a long time, and I've worked with multiple graduates with dyslexia, but there was stuff in that I did not know, like particularly around the auditory processing. I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought too much about that before. So it was really insightful for me as someone who I would have been experienced, but maybe if you want to talk about that course that you have, and I suppose when the course stays available, or how can employers get in touch with you with that?
Yeah, perfect. So thank you, Caroline, for that. Yeah, we launched our first Dyslexia in the Workplace course recently, as Caroline intended. It was very successful. We had a great bunch of participants to pilot this program on, so we were very lucky for that. So the course is going to be running. We're hoping it'll be in October. And as Caroline mentioned, it's a 4-week course. So we meet once a week for 2 hours, and we look in depth into what is dyslexia. We look at that inclusive workplace and the best practice assistive technology. But we also try and put all the information that we've learned and our experiences into practice, because it's important that it's not just that empty cert that it's, oh, I attended this course, but I can't change, let's say, the workplace environment, things like that. So it is really important that we can apply correctly the information that we've learned and things like that, and become more aware. So again, if anybody wants any more information about that, please get in touch with me. My email address, I think it went up in the chat box, but it's also my slides. Also, we do a lot of bespoke training. So if a specific organisation, wants us maybe to come in to do a specific session around dyslexia that would be relevant to their job roles, their organisation, that's, again, please get in touch with me. We also run dyslexia awareness sessions for the workplace and things like that. They can be quite short, just highlighting what dyslexia is. But again, any kind of questions about further training, or even maybe if some people, have dyslexia and they want further information, please get in touch with me and things like that. Or
There was one question that I think was just more of a chat in the chat box about somebody getting diagnosed as an adult. And is it too late or anything like that? So I was wondering, would you be able to just chat about if somebody, whether an employer or an employee, wanted to get diagnosed?
Yeah, I think never too late. Being honest, I was identified with dyslexia at 30. So, but prior to that, if somebody had said to me, I wouldn't have really understood the importance of having that identification or having that report. I kind of thought, I've finished college. What do I need that report for? Really, what's going to do? So I didn't foresee how empowering and really life-changing that report was. It told me all those years in school, when the teachers gave, and I received those negative messages of I was stupid, I wasn't good enough. This changed it for me. All those internal negative feelings I had about myself, it meant that I could look and go, hang on, I'm not stupid. I just learned differently. And in one way, if my educators had been aware of dyslexia, my experience would have been extremely difficult. But it also gave me the confidence that, it's okay to be dyslexic. It's okay to be different. It's okay if I can't do something, or I can't pronounce a word, or I can't read it, to say to someone, to ask them for help. And it really is life-changing now. It is an emotional roller coaster being identified. It's not something that, you know, you get your identification and you walk away with the paper and your life has changed. There is a lot of emotion. So, you know, to be aware of that, let's say for me, there was a bit of anger around, I was angry at the educators who you know, had mislabeled me as being lazy or stupid, you know, so I had to kind of deal with all of those emotions and things like that. So it was a process. But when you come out the other side, you are more confident, you are more aware of your challenges and strengths. Yeah, and it's just, it's so incredibly important. And sometimes it's difficult to put into words what it does for somebody. And that report, yeah, it's hugely important. So we strongly advocate for, you know, doesn't matter what age you are, you have a right to that identification.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I think just hearing those personal stories is so important, and it is empowering. It's kind of going, oh, actually, regardless of age and regardless of your situation that you're in, to get that diagnosis is so important. Thank you so much for that, Caoimhe. Caroline, is there anything you wanted to say before we finish up?
No, I just to say thank you very much, Caoimhe. It's been really interesting. I've even learned more stuff today, even though doing the 4-week course, I've still kind of got more of an insight, and it is really great. I think the interactivity and around the reading the paragraphs, you know, I think that really hit home for a lot of people. It certainly did hit home for me when I did it initially back in April. So that's why it's really important to share those kind of, I suppose, exercises with people who don't have dyslexia, so they can in some way empathize a little bit, you know. But yeah, no, just to say thank you so much again. Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for having me, guys, and thank you so much to everyone who attended.